Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the show. I've got the lovely Shona Allen with us again. Welcome back, Shona.
Hi.
We're going to talk about a little bit about Julian of Norwich and see where it takes us today. When I went and visited Shona and Gary Allen back in, well, it was autumn last year, wasn't it?
It was.
It took me to the church, which I must admit, I've forgotten what the name of the church is that Julian of
St.
Norwich.
Julian's.
Oh, it is called St. Julian's.
Yeah, St.
Okay.
Julian's.
Was it because it wouldn't have been St. Julian's before she hold herself up? I mean, bricked herself up in there, would it?
Well, I don't really know, to be honest. I mean, having looked at Julian, there's one or two people that, if you look about sort of at the narratives and things about her life, because there actually wasn't very much written about her life, so not much is really known for sure. Quite a few people will say, well, that wasn't her real name and she was actually named after the church. However, there is some quite interesting information, and that is that Julian apparently wasn't a particularly common name for women at those times. And but there was, however, a contemporary at the time with the same name called Julian of Erpingham, which I found really interesting because she was actually from one of the noble families of Norwich in the 14th century, and she was the sister of Sir Thomas Erpingham, who was a knight and fought at Agincourt. So it's been suggested by Father John Julian that she was actually a possible candidate for Mother Julian of Norwich.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I thought that was quite intriguing because, funnily enough, I used to live in the village called Erpingham. It was named after Sir Thomas Erpingham. And actually in the church of St. Mary's in Erpingham, Sir Thomas Erpingham's father, Sir John, is actually buried there.
Right. Okay. So, because in those days, they used to send the daughters, if they didn't want to marry them off, to convents or something. So maybe.
Well, I think from sort of what I could grasp of what John Julian was saying is that she basically, Julian of Erpingham, basically was married twice and had children, but unfortunately, because there were turbulent times, the Black Death was really prevalent. Actually, she lost both husbands, and I think her children. And so, what would have been left for her? I mean, it must have been absolutely horrendous and horrific for her. So maybe perhaps that's what sparked her into seeking a monastic life.
Do you think the two got mixed up then through history?
Well, it's quite possible. I mean, he's the only person I've seen that puts this forth, this suggestion. But I think, actually, there could be something in it because I think that, she did have maids, didn't she? And she was obviously well read and could write. And I think obviously only noble families, probably pretty much at the time, or convent educated people would have had the ability to write and read to that ability. So, and of course as well, to become an anchoress, usually you would have had to have some form of funding. So it wasn't actually that uncommon for people of nobility to have gone into being an anchorite. So I think it's quite interesting. So yeah, I think possibly he's quite right. Certainly interesting, food for thought.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Because like you say, the name's not that popular. She had, servants and things. So maybe they are one and the same person.
It's certainly intriguing, isn't it?
Because when you took me there, I thought the church was, obviously a delight. I love churches and things. But when we went up actually into what they think was where she was, I think it was the vicar or the I forgot what he was, but he came
in. The verger. Was he a verger? That was something yeah. We spoke to, yeah.
He I nearly said vector then. I've got other things on my mind, but he was saying this might not have been where she actually was, where everybody, it might have been in a different part. They don't really know where she was bricked up.
No, they don't, but there are, however, some footings of something if you remember, on the floor there, on the sort of left and right hand parts of the room. And I think that, I mean, it's difficult because obviously there weren't always great records kept of things like that at that time. Then, of course, you had the Reformation where you know, this kind of thing of anchoritism was basically all done away with and torn down. So it is difficult to know, but I think it was where we were, where we looked, for the simple fact that they still had some kind of footing. So something was clearly there at some point. And then, of course, the Church of St. Julian's was bombed in the Second World War. So much of it had to be rebuilt as well, not forgetting.
Because I thought when we went, that where we went for where she was supposed to have been was quite mystical anyway. And I felt we were saying there was a bit of a cold, it was a cold day anyway. It's a freezing cold day, wasn't it? But there was a different kind of coldness in there.
Yeah.
I call it the spiritual or off-worldly coldness, but it wasn't a horrible one.
No.
I suppose many people have been there themselves thinking this is where she was or believing that's where she was. So there's that energy going into there. But I remember when we went outside, there was like a little, what looked like could have been the sills or the outskirts of a window anyway, because she wasn't bricked in. I thought she was going to be bricked into something like a few feet wide, but it's actually like a room, and then she would speak to the people through the window, wouldn't she?
Yeah, I think as well that most often they had something called a squint as well, so they'd be able to view the services going on within the church as well. Then they'd have another kind of window where they would talk to people in the outside world that would come seeking wisdom and advice. And clearly there was obviously a port to pass food and waste, etc., through as well. And I think from what I understood, I think there was like an upstairs part to her cell as well, so she could just sort of go upstairs and go to bed and then come down to do her daily sort of prayer sessions and things. And I also understand she had a cat.
Yes, I remember.
So she was a cat lady.
Good on her, proper cunning woman.
Exactly. And I think that cats offer a lot of wisdom as well.
Because I was reading the book that I bought at the little church about how she became quite, would it be enlightened, or what started putting her on this path, because she'd been really ill and they thought she was going to die. So they brought the priest along to give her the last rites. And as he put the cross towards her face, that's when she started having these visions.
That's right. So, I mean, basically, she had really what we would class today as near-death experience then, wouldn't she?
And she was seeing, it helped her to suddenly understand the passion of the Christ on his them 3 days as he was being tortured and had the crown of thorns put on him. And that's as she was going through the maneuvers of what he was going through all the way up to the cross. But it made her see it, as I'm reading into her words, and I think what other people are saying is that she suddenly saw the glory of it all, even though it was so evil and horrible what was done to him, but why this was happening, why it was occurring. From a theological point of view, it is very interesting that they tried to say to you, go and walk the passion, don't they? Walk the walk that he did, feel the pain that he went through, and then feel the, you know, it helps you with the transformation of yourself, like he was transformed.
Yeah, exactly. I know, I mean, she had a series of 15 visions, I think it was, wasn't it, in one day, and then a separate one the next day. So 16 showings in all, as she called them, didn't she?
Well, she wrote about more, because I used to get her a bit mixed up with Hildegard de Bingen. I thought she drew as well, but she didn't really do it as an art form, did she? She put it all down in writing. And I don't think they know whether she would then read it out to people or whether it was just a personal thing. What do you think on that?
I think at the time, I think it was probably a personal thing, but I think that as I understand it, because there was what they called the short text, wasn't there? So she immediately wrote, you know, after she had these visions and things so that she didn't forget them. And then over quite a number of years, she kind of meditated upon and pondered and digested and then expanded upon, you know, the meanings behind what these visions were. So I think it's really interesting that, you know, in those days as well, anchorites were actually really popular. And whilst Julian of Norwich is the probably the most famous one, actually, in and around Norwich and Norfolk, they were extremely prevalent, which, I mean, I was quite surprised at that. So, you know, this whole thing of being a hermit or an anchorite actually was a really popular thing in medieval times. And I
Well,
think,
I'm sorry, go on.
sorry, no, I was just going to say, I think in Norwich at that time, also, I think it was between 1370 onwards, I believe, at that time, Norwich actually had the most amount of anchorites in the whole of England. So Norwich actually was probably quite one of the most religious centres in England.
Well, being from that area, you probably could see why it'd be so mystical. Why do you think that it was mystical for all these women to suddenly start in that time becoming to do this kind of thing?
Well, I can only think that perhaps people were perhaps a little bit more relaxed and understanding of things, because I think also the very nature of women doing this kind of thing as well. It was pretty much a male dominated thing, wasn't it? Religion to have priests, and only the priests kind of, you know, dictated what was acceptable and what wasn't in relation to the Bible. So I think to have women suddenly coming out and having these visions and giving advice, I mean, I think perhaps had they lived somewhere else, perhaps Julian wouldn't, you know, and the others wouldn't necessarily have been accepted. So for whatever reason, I think Norwich has always been a place of acceptance. You know, it's also interesting. I mean, we had the Lollards at the time as well, which unfortunately, you know, were put to death for heresy. You know, we had the strangers come to Norwich as well.
Strangers.
Yeah, the strangers were really interesting because basically they were fleeing religious persecution from the lowlands in the Netherlands and Belgium region. So, because of the kind of movement of Protestantism, you know, they were kind of more accepted over here, and Norwich was one of the places that they came, and with them, they brought their weaving skills as well.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, so we've actually got a place called the Strangers Hall Museum in Norwich, which would tell people all about that.
I need to check that out when I come and visit next time. And is it,
Definitely.
is that a name we perhaps gave them, the strangers, or would that be?
Yes, yes, exactly. That's right. So when the people came, they were called strangers.
But you were saying they were from
They were from the lowlands, so the
right.
Netherlands and Belgium, really, and they were basically fleeing religious persecution.
And did you have much religious persecution in Norwich in them times, like where you were, or would there
Well,
be?
as mentioned, the Lollards, yes. I mean, they were put to death for heresy. You know, so there's actually a place which is now a pub, which was the place of a Lollard's pit, and they were basically thrown in this pit, thrown to their death. And allegedly, on certain days, you're supposed to still be able to hear screams come from that area as well. So the whole thing was just awful.
And
And
was
I
that
think,
by? Oh, sorry, I was going to ask if that was by the actual priests and the Catholics or whatever, or was it from
mm,
the the peoples? They just didn't like these
no,
Lollards.
it was from the church basically
Right.
at the time. So it's really awful. And I think this is, you know, something of Julian of Norwich. I think that she would have been aware of. She would have been aware of the Lollardy. She was aware, obviously, and I think that's probably what her illness was probably she suffered from the Black Death, which again was really prevalent. So she would have had lots of death and dying all around her. She would have had lots of political unrest and religious unrest and all sorts. So I think she came at a time when it was really needed, where her teaching of love and tolerance and peace with the divine was actually really needed.
because as you were saying, her teachings was about love. Her writings are beautifully written, and you can feel the love in them. Though obviously it's not, romantic. Well, it's a kind of romantic love, but it's more of an unconditional love or compassionate love. She's trying to put across of what God, Christ, the whole Trinity is all about. She speaks about the Holy Spirit sometimes, which you don't often hear about in those days, because they were trying to drop the name of the Holy Spirit, and there's no such thing. But she was being obviously influenced by all that as well when she was having her visions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, it's interesting that she also looked upon God as not just being the father, but also the mother. And I think one of her sayings was, she said, as truly as God is our father, so truly God is our mother. So she was demonstrating the fact that, in a very male dominated environment in religion at the time, actually, they were missing out the sacred feminine, the divine feminine. Where is it? You need both sides. She's telling you that, it's not just the masculine side, you need the feminine side as well. And it's all about balance, isn't it?
Because when I was reading that bit, she doesn't mention Mary. She is sort of talking about, like you say, the divine feminine, not Mary the mother, which most people would think she was perhaps alluding to, but she I don't think she is at all. It's exactly what you're saying.
I would agree with you, and I think it's really interesting because to me, I think if you separate yourself away from the world, that's when you do have your most inspirational moments. I think, in the quietness of your own mind, when you go within, that's when you get your divine inspirations, don't you?
So she's like a role model for all of us to work upon ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I think being bricked up in a room for the rest of your life is slightly extreme though.
And no, I just can't imagine it, like it's not something I would do. I've had my moments when I thought, oh, I'll just go off and be a nun and live in a convent, but I definitely wouldn't be bricked up.
No,
That took a lot of courage to do and to want to have that done to her.
exactly. I mean, as I say, there were surprisingly quite a lot of hermits and anchorites at the time. And I know there was certainly sort of a golden age of women's mysticism, which occurred during the 13th and 14th centuries. But I think that Julian's revelations were really the first important example of a vision by an English woman. So in contrast with, Europe and the continent, where this was quite a common thing, but not in England. So I think, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I was reading about Marjorie Kemp, who apparently was
Hmm.
contemporary with Julian of Norwich, who was also
Yeah,
a visionary, but I couldn't work out whether she had, holed herself up somewhere, or she just still lived, in her little cottage perhaps down the road. Because I wonder if they ever met or anything. That again,
they did.
oh, they
Yeah,
did,
they
they?
did. Yeah.
Oh,
Marjorie Kemp, she actually came from, it was then called Bishop's Lynn. It's now called King's Lynn, which is in Norfolk. And she did actually come seeking counsel and wise counsel from Julian of Norwich. And it's actually written in, it's called the Book of Marjorie Kemp, which was considered the first autobiography in English. So quite amazing, really. But yes, she came. And actually, quite a lot of the details about Julian of Norwich's life came from this book by Marjorie Kemp. So it's actually a really important record because Marjorie Kemp, I believe what happened to her, with her first child, I think she was ill, and it caused sort of a series. I mean, some call it kind of a postpartum psychosis, but to her, she was obviously experiencing some kind of, revelations. Now, I think she got on the nerves of a lot of her local people because the way that she expressed it, she was always wailing, and
okay.
so I don't think she was very popular, put it that way. But yes, I think she just lived in a normal way. I know she traveled a lot. She went on many pilgrimages. She felt led by God to go on pilgrimages, one to the Holy Land as well. So she clearly believed that she was in communication with God.
Excellent. It's just, wonderful to hear about all these women doing this at that time,
Yeah, because it was really unusual because, as I say, writing and giving advice and wisdom, religious wisdom at the time, that wasn't really the done thing. That was a very male sort of orientated thing, and it was a very priestly male orientated thing, wasn't it?
Because I suppose this is after all the Inquisition and everything, isn't it? So they wouldn't be burnt as witches or anything. So, but
Well, I think the thing is as well, I mean, you're sort of going back to looking across to Catholicism. I mean, we still had Catholicism at that time, and it wasn't until the 1500s, 1530, something around that time, where we had the Reformation with King Henry VIII. So yeah, it was still pretty much a Catholic thing, but it just seems to be that it was more acceptable. I mean, you had the hermit St. Anthony, didn't you, in the desert? And I think, this all basically derived from the East, really, didn't it? From Egypt. You had many sort of hermits and people going out into the desert and living a life of, solitary kind of existence and communicating with the divine to receive inspiration. So it's interesting. I think even the word anchorite, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, actually comes from the ancient Greek, which was anachorites, which in itself is a verb derived from anachorein, meaning to withdraw. So you're withdrawing from the world, aren't you? And I think that once you were bricked in to your cell in the church, that was kind of a metaphorical death. That was your death because you're completely then separated from the rest of the world.
and being like that, because I've often wondered, oh, could I do that myself? I know I did try that in Wales once, went a little bit crazy, but I was in a little tiny summer house on a cliff in looking over the sea. But then she would have had people come in and, like you were saying, taking her waste away, giving her food and things, communicating with the locals, but also being given the respect of, she has her meditation time and her prayer time, still joining in with the church services, because as you said, the other side she would have been able, because when we were there, it was looking straight into the church, wasn't it?
Yes.
I think it was the rood beam was there, and then she'd have been able to see the whoever was giving the service. So it must have just created a very different atmosphere compared to us trying to do it in our own ways in our little houses where we're distracted left, right, and centre by everything. I used to think about living in a cave. I did my dissertation actually on the monks and such like out in Egypt, and how they used to go into the caves or sit on top of a pillar. Now that one I definitely wouldn't be able to do. And then people would come and give them their food, and then they'd give them a little blessing. It's like sitting on a pillar all day in the sun. Doesn't appeal to me.
No, me neither.
The devotion must be incredible, especially with Julian as well. From a womanly point of view, it must be a more of a feminine devotion, kind of like having a marriage, the alchemical marriage between themselves and with God, with Christ.
And I think as well, if she went through what we think perhaps she went through, i.e. losing both her husbands and possibly children as well, and probably friends and relations through the Black Death, it must have had an incredible effect on her psyche, mustn't it? And I think, you would kind of call out to God and sort of say, why do we have to go through all this? And I think this is actually where one of her sort of quotations comes from. And she was wondering, I think it was the 13th showing, that she was wondering why sin couldn't have been prevented. Why do we have to go through all this? And in this showing, this vision that she saw was Jesus. And basically, he informs her that it's necessary, that it should be so. But all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well, he said. So you know, I think really she's saying that through all the crisis and the terrible things that are happening, in the end, because look at what you are, you have the divine within you, you are the divine. Really, what does it matter what we go through in this life, because it's all about the next life, isn't it?
And in those days, which is just, beautifully said, that but in those days they would have had a faith, everyone would have believed in a God. They might have like pooed him a lot for all the stuff, but it's not like today where we have so many, sadly godless people out there.
You know, I think that is the thing. I think you're absolutely right, because so many people, you know, did believe that that was pretty much, I think it was almost unheard of that no one believed in God in those days. So I think it was a pretty much a given, wasn't it? And of course, you know, in her naivety early on, she was obviously, you know, thinking, well, why do we have to go through all this suffering? What's the point? But you know, the point is that it's necessary for the soul to progress, in my opinion, in this life. And it's only going through all these difficulties and, you know, yes, we have some lovely moments and some very pleasurable moments, of course, as well. But it's usually the difficulties that probably teach us the most, isn't it, when you think about it?
If it was an easy life, then yeah, we wouldn't really want to leave it,
Exactly.
would we?
No, and what really would you learn from that? If you had everything on a plate and you never had to do anything, then you probably wouldn't. And what would you learn from it? Not really very much, would you? So it'd be fairly pointless. So I think, you know, that message is a really important one, isn't it?
Do you know, because I haven't looked into this properly, when she had that message all about the all will be well from Christ, did she see him, or did she hear his words? Do we know?
Yeah, I believe that she supposedly saw him and heard him. So I think, you know, to her, when she was having these visions, it was, you know, like we're talking right now. So to her, it would have been really, really realistic. And it kind of got me thinking, because I was thinking about, you know, we have something, you know, or we did have things called the resurrection cults, didn't we, many years ago? And we're sort of going back to the mystery schools and things now in ancient Egypt and Greece, etc. And the whole point of those was, and of course later on the Gnostics took this along, but the whole point of this was it was, you know, they would have a near-death experience, and it was going through trials and tribulations. Sometimes it was partaking in a drink, I think it was called kykeon, in the Eleusinian mysteries, wasn't it, that they drank. And of course, obviously it had something, they believe it had ergot in. Ergot was the fungus that grew on wheat and barley. And ergot, actually, that's where LSD comes from. So it causes this kind of hallucinatory effect, which I think stimulates the psychic senses in the brain. So a lot of these kind of initiates or disciples that partook of this, it made them have like an almost near-death experience, and they would get these revelations and these divine experiences. So it was the death of the ego, the material lower self, to then make way for a new birth of the divine person. And I
Yeah,
think this is what happened with Julian, myself.
but she was able to contact like her higher self and then go into these other realms, whether it's spiritual realms, heavenly realms, whatever, and make contact with the Christ. How beautiful, it's just, well, it is divine, isn't it? It's what she was doing. It's what it was all
Mm.
about.
And I think the lovely thing about it is I mean, I personally believe she's absolutely right that everything is about love when you think about it. Although we have horrible things happening, and I know, and you know, times at the moment are rather strange and very unsettling and not very pleasant, with a lot of the things that are going on. But then when you switch that part off and you look at nature, for example, and you look at the animals and the plants and the flowers and the beautiful blossom that's blooming and the lovely fragrances from it all, you know, and the birds, they're still going about their business. The deer and the animals are still going about their business. They don't stop. The flower doesn't stop growing. The acorn doesn't stop turning into an oak tree because of everything else going on in the world. And it shows you that the essence of everything is love, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what Christ came to teach us all in that new gospel, in the new gospels and the New Testament. You know, the Old Testament was, we were talking about this earlier, weren't we, before we came on air? Old Testament God angry, New Testament God love.
Yeah.
You feel
Love and
different.
forgiveness.
But
That's
you feel
right.
different when you feel the love. You know, it's a struggle to tune into sometimes, because like you say, getting on with the rest of the world. But when you do reach it, it is a totally different way of being and feeling,
Mm.
totally different vibration. You do feel that you're in touch with the divine. It's just difficult to maintain because something comes and knocks you off that.
Yeah, comes and disturbs your peace and, harmony. I know. But that's all about, living in this world at the moment, isn't it? But I have to say that, if it wasn't for nature, I think I'd just go potty. I think, you know, being able to go out with my chickens, to look at the lovely flowers in the garden and looking at the beautiful blossoms. Spring is my favorite time of all, the new growth of everything. Just we have such a beautiful world, really. If you eliminate all of the not so pleasant stuff going on and you just concentrate on the beauty in nature, it's just incredible. And you think all of that, and I know there are people out there that don't believe in God. I personally do, because I look behind and there is an intelligence and an order to everything, absolutely everything when you look at it,
Yep,
isn't there?
cosmic intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're expected to believe that this just came from a few elements and making a big bang. Doesn't,
No.
no. It just suddenly knew how to be an oak tree. It just suddenly knew how to be a complex working human body.
But even if that was the way, there's an intelligence behind it. So, that would have been a divine being of some kind that did that.
Mm, yeah, I believe so. I think that the more you look into it, I think the more you realize there is such a great beauty, an order to the universe. And I think going back to ancient Egypt again, that is what Mat is. It's about balance and order, and truth. And as we were talking about that earlier, is that to me, that is what truth is. To get close to truth is to get close to God. And I think Julian also makes mention of that too.
Yeah, I think she talks about truth, love, and beauty. I think. Well, I might have got that mixed up with the Masons, but
It's something similar, don't they?
yes.
And strength, wisdom, and beauty.
Yeah. Well, we're about to run out of time. So I want to say thank you very much, Shona. It's been great talking about the women and the mystics and the visionaries. You're one yourself. You're such a beautiful person. I thank you
Oh,
so much for coming on
you
board.
too. Beautiful soul. Thank you.
You want to tell everyone about your website?
Um, yeah, we haven't done any podcasts recently, but we are intending to do some again fairly soon, and it's the www.theallensinvestigate.com. And we still have obviously all of our older podcasts. If anybody hasn't come across them, you can go and find them on YouTube and Rumble, I believe.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Shona. And we'll
Thank
do
you
another
so
one
much.
again soon, hopefully.
These seem to have gone really quickly, actually, didn't it?
It did. I thought we'd only been talking about 20 minutes, but yeah, time has run out. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Shona. Do check out her website, check out her all the podcasts, and Gary's books as well are on there. And we'll get both you and Gary on next time.
Thank you. Yeah, it'd be lovely.
Super. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.